Mr. Chairman, we are live.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Call the meeting to order. First order of business is roll call, please.
Representative Andrew, Representative Brown, Representative Connolly, Representative Harshman, Representative Nyman, Representative Newsom, Representative Obermuller, Representative Summers, Chairman Paxton.
Here. We are on Senate File 127, Wyoming Learn While You Earn. And I believe where we left off was taking public comment. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Anyone like to comment on this bill? Yes, come forward, Lisa. Identify yourself. Tell us who you represent.
There. Hi, I'm Lisa Johnson with the Wyoming Association for Career and Technical Education, speaking on behalf of Senate File 127. And this bill is similar to a bill that we followed during the last session or last year that didn't make it through the process. And we listened to what some of the concerns were, and there's been a lot more conversation, I think, with members of our organization, with legislators and agency and private industry, just to try to address some of those concerns. I think one of the issues was about if there was a question over duplication of effort and making sure that the bill would make the best use of resources. And I mean, I'm sure you'll probably hear from some agency people, but I hope that has been addressed. And I think the other bill that you've already heard that's a companion bill to this really gets at making a clear understanding of student learners and the need for letting these students have learning opportunities in industry. And so I think these issues go hand in hand. And the thing that's really great about this bill is it's cost effective because it allows students to have job experience working out in an industry, and that, you know, if the equipment and the training and everything is available at the company, that's really valuable work-based learning, and it could really save the school money if they're able to have that applied learning. The other thing that I think is really a benefit of this bill is career awareness. A lot of times in all different kinds of committees and groups, you hear people say, "Boy, we're exporting Wyoming's greatest resource. And what can we do to help retain our students or encourage them to come back to Wyoming?" And I think this bill does that because it allows them to get out in the field, understand what's expected, makes them a better employee, and gives them a better understanding of how to put their skills to use. So I think that there's other industry, you know, there's broad industry support that I think you'll hear from. And I just am happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions? Okay, we're gonna let you off easy.
Thank
Lisa.
you.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, come forward, please. Tell us who you represent. Give us your name, please. Go ahead.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure. Good noon. Good day. My name is Pat Joyce. I'm the Assistant Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. I appreciate you hearing this bill or continuing to hear this bill the other night. I wanted to mention that I appreciated Representative Nyman's comments about his mother teaching 8 grades in a one-room country schoolhouse, because that's where I started out. And I started out on a ranch in eastern Montana and grew up there. And I think as a ranch kid, you get a chance to learn a lot of different skills that you don't get to learn, even as simple as driving. We were just out in the hallway listening to the executive director of the Mining Association, Mr. Detai, and he's in a small panic because his oldest child is getting his driver's permit training today. And I said, "Did you teach him how to drive?" And he goes, "Oh God, no." He said, "Well," and we started comparing stories. I said, we were steering the Jeep and everything else when we were 5 and we couldn't reach the pedals. But I think it's the same with any, whether you're raising your kids in town or in the country or whatever, we all pick up different skills along the way. we were excited to see this bill come through. We've been in the discussion for the last 2 years, of course, as you probably well know, trying to figure out how we do get these skills acquired, especially for students coming out of high school. We have several minds who have said, we'll pick these kids up the day after graduation from high school if they have this and this and this, you know, and they list off 2 or 3 things that we could at least get them trained on in high school. So I need to make a clarification, at least as the way the laws stand right now. We have 2 groups of people that we represent, which is the mines. We have 32 operating mines in the state of Wyoming, over 8,500 employees amongst all those mines. For every mine every mine job, we figure we have about 3 jobs that are created in the state, 2 of which we know come from our supply and service companies. So we're looking at 25 to 35,000 jobs that we could affect, all kinds of skills. When I look at the mine jobs, we have probably 7 different sectors that we separate all the jobs out into. I always say, when you look at a mine, it's like going into a small city. You know, they've got everything. They do have nurses, they do have engineers, they do have lawyers, they do have mechanics, they do have, you know, so it takes everything. In the mines alone, even though I'll explain in a second where we're limited there, you know, we have the electricians, the diesel mechanics, millwrights, plant maintenance techs, drilling supervisors, lab techs, environment and health and safety, lab techs and collectors, machinists. That's just a small cadre of the types of jobs that we hire for, and they have a different type, you know, level of skills that all of those jobs, excuse me. But we represent the mining associates of Montana, what am I saying, of Wyoming, and we have about 200 members, and they are businesses that supply services and deliver product to the mines to help us operate every day. And that's where I think we'll find that relationship that we can start training these kids at some of these companies. L&H Industrial, for an example. I mean, you know, you look at all the types of things that they do, we can pull these kids out and get them into some of those businesses. So we see this as a real positive to get our workforce trained for the next decades, whatever. So we'll worry about DTI's kid learning how to drive, and we will, but we'll be behind this bill, and we appreciate you finishing this hearing today and hearing this bill. So I'll stand for any questions.
Questions from the committee? Okay, thank you for your,
Oh, I forgot to say
you
one
did
thing.
have one? Okay. Representative Newsom.
I'll just while you're finishing. Is it close to Savage, Montana? Where you grew up?
I actually went to first grade in Savage, Montana.
Serious?
Seriously.
One of my best friends used to call him the Savage from Savage.
I wonder who that was. Yeah, we were in Glendive, Montana. So, yeah.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do the mines currently have apprenticeship programs, and do you see that tying into this bill? And how does that work with the apprenticeship programs and with what's proposed here?
Mr. Chairman,
Go
you
ahead.
just reminded me of the point I was going to make and got off on my silly story. The mines do have apprenticeships. Where we figured out this last couple of months, we figured out that through the MSHA, Mining Safety and Health Administration, which all of our mines operate under, their law, federal law, they cannot hire anyone under the age of 18. So that's why I'm saying we do have 2 groups we represent, the mines and the suppliers and service companies. And so we would probably encourage all of this activity to go to the MOM members. And our mines do have internships. They are 18 and over. I think you'll see like on a Natrona patch, they've been working with Western College for several years now, and they have some good training programs there where it's kind of a work school related. They'll work 2 months, go to school 2 months, back and forth, kind of varies depending on the program. Peabody has got an internship. There's some others that do. We've got some of the smaller independent owned mines that would bring some students in after they've graduated. So we do. There's that one caveat. Excuse me.
Yes, Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to vote in favor of the bill this year. I mean,
Are
it's
you?
been, yes, I am. It's been cleaned up very nicely.
Mr. Chairman.
But I do have a question and a bigger, I'm not sure if I'm going to call it a concern, but that, and so I'm curious about the apprenticeship programs that you're familiar with, that this then would become a junior version of them in some way. It would be, I mean, that would be a way to think about it. And I'm curious about men versus women, boys and girls. And that, to me, too often, these programs and the occupations that were just mentioned, for example, are overwhelmingly male dominated. And I want to make sure that we have opportunities for our girls as well. And I'm confident you do not discriminate. You do not say only boys. I am confident of that. But that being said, I am curious about the relative percentage of men and women in the adult ones and what we then might expect for the kids.
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman? I was pleasantly surprised when I came into this job 4 years ago to find the number of women in these jobs. I mean, I've listed off these jobs and these are some of them. You know, if you want to go way back, one of my nieces who's probably 50 years old at this point, we have an odd related family, who's been a machinist for 30 years. There aren't any of these jobs that women don't do and couldn't do. And so when I look, I don't know a number to tell you right now, the percentage, but I was pleased to find out when I went in this job and started going out to the mines, the number of women that I would find in areas that I didn't expect to find them. I think that the most fun was we took a tour of, actually it was school teachers. We took out to Buckskin Mine in north of Gillette one day. This has been about 3 years ago during their CTE, or not CTE, what am I saying, STEM program that they had up there. We took them out for a tour, and they had them we had all the teachers in a bus, and we were driving through the mine, and the summer storm started rolling through, and the electricity started popping, and all of a sudden we hear the woman's voice come over the intercom or the radio, and so we all need to clear the mine, and she was driving the drag line.
Mr. Chairman?
Follow up?
Yeah, just thank you. Could you get me the number? Because I appreciate the anecdotes, but the data doesn't bear it out. I mean, I look at the DWS data for the representation of men and women in industry and occupations. And so could you get us that kind of percentage for the apprenticeship programs that you're talking about?
I'd have
Go
to
ahead.
call each of the mines, excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I'd have to call each of the mines and do a survey.
Great.
We have one started from 2 years ago, and we could do an update on that.
I'd
I would just
appreciate that.
encourage you that there's a lot of women working out in these mines and in these supply and service businesses. So.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the high school component to this. You know, you were talking about the age 18. And of course, most kids turn 18 sometime during their senior year.
Mhm.
So how do you see this working with high school kids because of that
Well,
age restriction?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
that would, I think that means turning 18 would satisfy that MSHA requirement. And being that this is a work in progress, I think we should have some discussion about timing. I don't know what kind of waiver, I don't know that there would be any waiver on that. So, but I could look into it.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Delancey, would you come forward, please? Introduce yourself. Tell us who you represent, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey, and I'm with the Wyoming Business Alliance. We too stand in strong support of Senate File 127 and ask for your favorable consideration. For all the reasons stated by Ms. Joyce, I really don't want to be duplicative, so I thought maybe I would address some of the questions from the committee that's come up and add a little bit more input on that, Mr. Chairman. But really, by having this opportunity to have that career exploration is really consistent with a lot of the conversations that this body, as well as your colleagues, have had as far as positioning for the future. And we need to do a better job of exposing our kids to career pathways that can keep them here in Wyoming and be able to power our state for the future, not only in our traditional legacy industries, but also our new industries. And some of these fundamental skills that these on-the-job learning opportunities can have really can explore, help men and or young girls and boys, have that opportunity to test out different exposures to items that they otherwise wouldn't have. I'd like to refresh your recollection as far as House Bill 239, which Chairman Greer brought as a companion bill to this bill, which actually opens up that additional component for student learning agreement, which kind of brings these apprenticeships down to Representative Obermuller's question about under 18. Under the OSHA provisions, there was not the availability to bring students on in a learning capacity with businesses because of some liability barriers. So what Chairman Greer did and Senator Kinski is they put their heads together and really worked these pathways in two tracks. So House Bill 239 obviously has left the House. I believe it's in good shape in the Senate. In fact, it's going to be heard across the hallway. So they truly are companion bills. But working together gives those opportunities for the high schoolers to have that on-the-job learning. In addition to that, as I said, girls and boys can have the chance to be exposed to skills that otherwise they wouldn't have known. I have a daughter who loves to weld in my house, and I didn't even know what welding was when I was her age. So I'm encouraged to see that she sees that as a necessary skill to have on the ranch. In addition to that, I ask for your continued consideration on this bill, as I really see that this is a way to help bridge the education community and the business community together, and to continue to forge those points of collaboration for us all to benefit. So don't see a downside to this bill. We really ask for your passage out and continue to support providing those opportunities to help position Wyoming students for the future. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Delancey?
Thank you,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
thanks, Cindy. Welcome. Introduce yourself, please. Tell us who you represent.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Erin Taylor. I guess it's afternoon by now. Erin Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. Speaking in support of this bill, you did hear from Executive Director Sandy Caldwell last week about some of the particulars of the bill. Why the colleges are excited about this is this just does continue those learning opportunities for students. And I just wanted to address a couple of things, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay with you. There was a question the other day about, is this necessary? And I think what this allows is if there's a party along the stage process, who's involved with this, to say, we just can't do this, or there might be reasons that they come up with that they can't do it. This just sets a framework for how it can be done. And what I really like about this bill that we've seen in other bills is it doesn't have to be with the community college that might be, that services that business in that particular town. It could be with another community college in a different district, or it could be a consortium of community colleges, which is something that we've really been trying to emphasize with these Wyoming Works programs and otherwise. So really strongly in support of the bill, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your consideration.
Okay, questions from the committee? Okay, thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, come forward, please. Introduce yourself. Tell us who you represent.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. Much to my chagrin, I realize it's been 40 years ago, but when I was in high school, we had a program similar to this where you could work 2 class periods a day. We called it COE. I don't know what it stood for, but one of the most important things that came out of that is you found if you had an aptitude and an interest in other things besides going to college. I didn't make a living out of changing tires and oils at a gas station, but some of my classmates that learned that they liked working as a mechanic, they went on to make a career of it. Some of them learned that they understood they couldn't do well in school in the books, but had a fantastic aptitude as plumbers, electricians, And now in today's world, we add computers to that. In the industry I represent, computer knowledge is essential. Everything, your tractors are just as computerized as cars, but be able to build the websites, to have your internet activity, to develop your business. As more and more of my members get into the niche marketing, being on the web is extremely important. So learning these skills at a young age will help facilitate things going forward. And the biggest thing, as I said, was finding out that you have an interest and an aptitude at a young age and start your career path that much earlier. I've talked too long, sir, but I know it might surprise some of you to be in front of, for Rep Moline to be in education supporting a bill, but sitting in strong support of this just because of the importance, not just to my industry, but to the state, as a whole. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
Okay, questions for Mr. Moline? Yes, Representative Nyman.
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman, thank you. It was supervised occupational experience is what that stood for. And we were a part of that too when I grew up. And we had ladies and gentlemen that would leave the high school and they would go and assist in bookkeeping, filing, worked in multiple different locations around there, followed up on accounting, and guys would go out to ranches and they would work for 2 hours a day, helping ranching and gas stations and service. So it was an excellent way for kids that were still in high school to be able to earn money while getting an opportunity to decide on wherever they wanted to direct their life. So very good.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Mr. Moline, I can't refuse to ask you this question. So we have an appropriation in this bill and it's subject to further appropriation. So where do you suppose we should get the money for this?
Mr. Chairman, that's a little bit beyond my wheelhouse on this. I believe, there's some other funding mechanisms we use for education at the higher level. Perhaps we could divert some of that money to this program. It is education, it's work education, but perhaps we could divert some of the monies from other higher ed programs to come into this program to fulfill the needs.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? I hate to tell you, but 40 years ago, I was involved in that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as a side note, all of a sudden, my God, that's been 42 years ago when I did that. But one thing I would like to add, even if you don't go on to make it a career, it gives you some life skills that you can use in your own home. Learning some things through vocational ag program. I'm not too scared to change a light switch, a two-way switch, a three-way, no. But change an outlet, granted, it's not much, but when we're paying electricians $100 an hour, and we're paying mechanics good money, which they well deserve, but so to be able to do some of these things for yourself, it's a good thing. It helps as a well-rounded, educated population.
Sometimes it tells us what we don't want to do for the rest of our life, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Any other questions, Mr. Chairman?
Just a question, and maybe this is, and it makes me think of this when the good representative brought this up, is in our situation, we didn't supplement it or subsidize it. When we went, the businesses paid us. I mean, they were glad to have the help and they would come and pay us. And so we didn't have to subsidize the businesses in order to get them to do it because we were, getting paid on the job training basically. And then we checked back in with our schools. So it's kind of interesting that we're kind of having to come the other direction on this, what this is looking at, because they were looking for workers that were willing to learn and be trained. And so we would pay you for that. And so kind of a different look at it from back in that time of day.
But I do want to add one thing. I think it's important on this, to make sure that these, if they are under 18, which many of us were when we were, especially in the fall semester of our senior year, to make sure they do have the coverage so the business is protected as well as the workers themselves. So.
Yes, Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, Mr. Moline. Now I'm going to put my hat on from revenue, which is where I've seen you the most, other than in town, and follow up on the good majority floor leader's question about money. And you said, well, take it from higher education. The money is going to higher education, right? And so going back to where's the revenue going to come from? what's your association's position on getting the revenue? You've just said, take it from the place that it's already going to. That's certainly not going to work. So we need revenue.
You're on the hook there.
Yeah.
Marlene.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley, this is a conversation that we have had before. My members' policy at this time is for me to not support increase in fees or taxes. Until my members change their policy, I have no choice because I am not representing myself. I am representing my Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation members in the state. My boss and I have asked our membership at this point, is there any tax or fee that you are willing to accept? And their response back was, at this time, we still believe that there's cuts that can be made to balance the state's budget. That's my members' policy, and I am bound to that.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, Clarissa, do we have anyone virtually who would like to testify?
Mr. Chairman, I don't see anyone with their hand raised right now.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else in the room would like to testify? All right, what's your pleasure?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to get the sponsor up. and ask
Okay.
a question.
All right.
That's possible, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, you're on the hot seat.
It seemed like a hot seat. I've always felt welcome in front of your committee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And so before I make this motion, I just want to let you know. So the challenge on this bill right now is timing. So we can get it out of here, but it has an appropriation in it, which means it would have to be re-referred and go to another committee and get out today. So I'm going to make a motion, and I just wanted you to know this up front. I'm going to make a motion to strip your appropriation. Then it can go to the floor, and one of us, if we so choose, can bring that appropriation back in. But I want you to understand what I'm doing before I do it, since you're the bill sponsor. Thank
Mr.
you,
Chairman, Representative Summers, you've given me one more trick to add to my own bag now. I would like to add this, with respect to Representative Nyman's comments. This is different from what you and I had in high school. It's really taken it up several notches. I took welding in high school because I heard every person should have a trade, and I got a B- on my bead block in welding. And I keep telling the local welding companies that, but they haven't offered any positions, even though they're short on welders. With respect to the funding, I did want to offer a couple comments. I also think there's a role for a community commitment here. You know, when I was mayor of Sheridan, on our optional 1 cent, I added an item called economic development. And we devoted $500,000 a year to hiring instructors in the CTE programs at the community college because the college was short. And I feel local communities can and should step up. It shouldn't always be just the state's responsibility. I feel local communities got to have some skin in the game. And so that's why a lot of the discussion about funding with Representative Greer, we were thinking about maybe a local Bochis and some other options. But with respect to funding, I do look forward to the continued work of the Community College Sustainability and Funding Task Force. That'll be good to see. We do have the ARP monies we'll be back here for, although I'm sure those will rapidly get oversubscribed, even as large as that is. But they do highlight education as one of the key components of that ARP. So that's another option. I just wanted to volunteer those.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, members of the committee and Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else have any other questions or comments before we proceed with it? Thank you, Senator. All right, what's your pleasure? Moved by Brown, seconded by Summers.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a general comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I support the bill and what this bill is trying to do, but I do go back to the funding piece. And when I make a motion on the million, it's for the reason I gave, but I still have concerns when we write open-ended bills that are going to require appropriations and we don't take the responsibility of finding the money somewhere. And yes, we can shift money back and forth, but it still becomes, taking away from Peter to pay Paul. And so I think it's a great program. Obviously, my name's on it. I've got a few amendments. I may not make them all here. But thank you.
Okay. Did you make your,
No.
move your amendment yet?
No, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, page 18. Starting on line 18 and ending on page 19 through line 2, basically the elimination of section 3. So I would move to delete section 3.
Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Brown. Discussion on the amendment.
Question.
Question has been called. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Okay, the amendment is carried. Back on the bill.
One more, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Gotta find it. Page 13, line 6. And I'm gonna read the sentence. Basically, this is where in this section or this Romanette is where colleges apply. And then on line 6, the commission shall provide funding. I worry a little bit about that because it says they shall provide funding, and I don't see another Romanette that gets them off the hook if there's not funding. And so maybe I've just missed that in this section. But so what I'd like to do is beginning on line 6 after period, I'd like to put subject to further appropriation, comma, the commission shall.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Seconded by Harshman. Everyone understand the amendment?
And I'm not sure I have the right language, but basically it would be subject to further appropriation. The commission shall provide funding to each college.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Right. Is this in similar nature to a couple of the bills that we've seen come out of appropriations that say subject to the availability of funds?
Yeah.
Is that what you're looking
Yeah,
at?
maybe I'll go to that. Subject.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a friendly amendment.
Okay.
Subject to the availability of funds.
Okay. Comments,
Is there a second?
questions?
Question.
That was a friendly amendment, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right, what's your pleasure on the amendment?
Question.
Question's been called. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Okay, the amendment is passed. Back on the bill.
Question on the bill.
We have one more. The king of amendments. Does that work, guys?
Well, Mr. Chairman, really, it's just to have a discussion. I don't know how strongly I am, but on page 7, line 7 and 8, no payment shall be made for a student's participation in a program under this article for more than 6 semesters while enrolled in high school and 6 academic terms while enrolled in a community college. And I think the original was maybe 4. And so I'm going to make the motion to go back to 4 because I think it does limit. Frankly, it's the appropriator coming out. I mean, the old appropriation. I think you limit the semesters, you limit the spend. And I just wanted discussion in this committee about what it should be.
Okay, seconded by Brown. Discussion on the amendment, proposed amendment. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I am going to vote in favor of this, and I actually appreciate the majority floor leader's comments on this. I think we need to walk before we start running. And I think opening this up, the discussion that we heard as this was brought in is there may be some overly ambitious juniors and sophomores that may want to take advantage of this. And I understand the juniors part, but they're covered underneath the 4. But when it comes down to the sophomores, I'm not so sure that we're going to have those overly ambitious. And let's have that discussion at a later date once we actually have some funding up and running for it, number 1. And number 2, we actually have interest in the program and a program up and running.
Okay. Further discussion? Yes, Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor as we look at high school for the 4 semesters, but as we go into the community colleges, sometimes those students are working. And so limiting it to maybe 4 academic semesters, that's the assumption that they are full-time students. And if they are part-time students, they may not be able to complete their certification program or whatever program they're part of in just 4 semesters. And I think 6 semesters might be a better amount of time for completion of a certificate in a community college.
Yes, Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think it's a good question by the representative. And I think what we do in all these other programs, and I think it'd be handled by rules in this as well, and it's 4 equivalents, you know, so if you do a couple part-times, 8 half-times, or whatever it might be. But I think this sets it out that it's 4 full-time and the max is all we're going to pay. And I think that's appropriate. And I think the rest, your concern can be handled, I think, in rules and would be. And that's how we do all these programs, really, my experience with it. So thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Other comments on the amendment? Okay, sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no? No. The amendment is carried. Back on the bill. Question on the bill. Roll call, please.
Hey, Representative Andrew,
Aye.
Representative Brown, Representative Connolly, Representative Harshman, Representative Nyman, Representative Newsom, Representative Obermueller, Representative Summers, Chairman Paxton.
Yes, go ahead. Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to mention to the committee, I'd like to add in a reporting requirement here. I didn't have the language for it, and I'll just do it on the committee of the whole.
Okay. Okay, well, we'll hold those. All right, the motion is passed. Thank you, all of you, for your testimony. We're going to move now to Senate Joint Resolution 4. You bet. And Education Chairman Scott, Senator Scott, please.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I bring you Senate Joint Resolution 4, subject to school capital construction, constitutional amendment. Mr. Chairman, we have currently a problem in the capital construction area. It has principally, since the time of the Campbell II decision, been funded with co-lease bonus money. Mr. Chairman, those monies are gone. They ain't coming back. And we got to find some different way to do this. This is an attempt to do a different system. Will solve the problem. There'll be no illusions about it. The money for the solution is going to come from property taxes. So let's make that plain up front. That's what this is talking about. It's a version of this amendment passed the Senate in 2018, failed in House committee. I'm bringing it back rewritten. And when you look at our experience since the Campbell II decisions, we've been spending between school capital construction, major maintenance, an average of 300 million a biennium. And that's an average. There was a peak period in there about 10 years ago. Went well over that. But long-term, we're going to have that kind of spending, I think, some version of that. What I heard talking to a lot of my fellow members in the Senate was they wanted some kind of a system where decision was made by people with skin in the game was the favorite phrase that they used. And this amendment seeks to do that. It
is needed as a constitutional amendment because we are bluntly overturning a piece of the Campbell decisions. And I think there were some, forget the legal reasoning for a moment. I think there were some very real reasons the Supreme Court decided the way they did, and illustrating real problems in this amendment seeks to deal with those. So there really was, the Supreme Court was not irrational in the decision it made. It was trying to solve some very real problems, and I think we need to pay attention to those, and I believe this does. What I want to do is take the committee through the mechanics of the amendment, and then we'll talk a little bit about timing on solving this problem, because this is a solution to the problem. There may be others, Mr. Chairman, that we'll need to consider, but we are going to need to do something. Mr. Chairman, the first page is the boilerplate. The substance of the amendment is on, starts at the top of page 2. And we're going to go through I want to go through this almost word by word, because this is a constitutional amendment. And once you do one of those, it's a lot harder to change than something else. Can be, but it's a lot harder. And you write constitutional amendments very different, Mr. Chairman, than you do statutes. You try to put the basic principles in and put them in solidly enough so that you can make it work, but you do not try to put the administrative details in a constitutional amendment. So we have to think about it a little different than we would think about a statute. With that introduction, the legislature provide by law systems public school capital construction subject to following. Now, public school capital construction, we are spending about a quarter of our money we spent in this area, a little more, I think, on major maintenance. This does not cover major maintenance. So make that plain that this is the solution for, we've spent since Campbell 2, we've spent 2.7 billion plus on school capital construction, about 1.3 billion, a little under that on major maintenance. You add them together, the total spending is 3.9 billion. So this is dealing with that 2.7 billion portion of the problem.
I interrupt you just for a second. It's a question from Representative
Yeah.
Summers.
Thank you.
I didn't want to demote him.
No, I'm good. I like the House. So Senator, thank you, and Mr. Chairman, thank you. But in statute, school capital construction includes major maintenance by statute.
Yeah.
And so when you put it in here, unless you go back and change the other statute, you are talking about major maintenance. That's number one. And then the second thing is you mentioned the $300 million mark, but that I think probably includes anything in the last 10 years, that average would include the major maintenance, I suspect. So I'm trying to figure out what figures you're using, and then let's realize what's in law.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go ahead.
On the figures, what I did was I added up starting with the biennium that the Campbell 2 decision came in, which you could add it in or leave it out as relatively small figures, up to the present, including finishing out the biennium we're in right now with what's been appropriated already. Added them up and added up the capital construction, added up the major maintenance separate, and then added the two of them together. And the reason I did that, I was going to just talk about the capital construction part of it, but the LSO said, we used a major part of the major maintenance, particularly in the early years, to fix the deficiencies that the court had identified in Campbell 2. So in fairness, you really needed to put both of them together. So I did that. but I also have it broken out separately so that you can evaluate the numbers that way. But that's how I achieved the numbers. And then I said 300 million a year. I took the number of years involved and divided the total by that. Very simple calculation.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, first provision, local school districts shall be primarily responsible for providing school facilities through bonds or other means. Couple of points on that. That's directly overturning Campbell, making it primarily a local decision. Second, notice the words or other means. There may come a time, Mr. Chairman, whereas the finances of this world evolve, and it's international now as well as just within the United States, where bonding doesn't make any sense, doesn't work. And we may have to do it through a sales tax. We may have to do it. There's all kinds of different ways you could do it. I wanted, because it's a constitutional amendment, I wanted to have the latitude. If the world changes that way, we don't have to amend our constitution. We can deal with the problem. So you'll see that in several places in this. And there may be some particular circumstances, and I think particularly of Teton County, where that may need to be the case. So that additional language there is important.
Yes, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I honestly don't know the answer to this, but I know you will because you've been here a lot longer than me. Can you put a tax in a constitutional amendment, or is that unconstitutional in of itself?
We have a 1.5% severance tax dedicated to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund that was, you read your constitution, it's right there. I can remember voting on it as a private citizen in 1974. One of the smarter things the people of Wyoming have ever done. So yes, you can.
Then I have a follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, follow up.
Because I had this further in my notes, but since we're talking about this, Mr. Chairman, thanks. So why not put the solution in here? Why not be upfront with the people of Wyoming and recognize the fact that we are gonna have to do this in order to pay our bills, and just put a mill, 2 mills, whatever you want in.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
because we do not know and cannot know what demands there really will be going out a long time in the future. It was appropriate for the Permanent Mineral Trust. You know, we were enunciating a principle and we added to it legislatively. I remember watching Nell Smith do that on the floor before I was a member, putting that extra 1% into the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund way back at the beginning because they didn't know what else to do with it. And we were rolling in money at a boom at that point. And his explanation was put it in now and we can take it out when we really need it in a downturn. But that was done by statute. Here, we really don't know how much we're going to need in any one time. And forecasting something like that 20, 30, 40 years out, it would be just impossible.
Follow up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I appreciate that. But in just 5 minutes ago, you said we have a $300 million past obligation and that we can expect that. So basically you were projecting out by showing our past.
Yeah.
So if you're projecting out, then we can anticipate what we're missing and how much we would need to tax to fill that hole.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, for the next 4 to 6 years, will it be 300 million or 150 million? 6 to 8 years out, biennial. Will it be 300 million or 600 million? Is the Biden administration going to destroy our economy and move a lot of people out of Wyoming because there isn't the jobs here anymore? Because we can't drill for oil and gas anymore? Or are we going to find some legal way to put a stop to them, or are they going to lose an election in 2 years? We just don't know. So for operating, this sort of operating thing is going to be variable. I think putting a specific mill levy in is an invitation for trouble. again, it's hard to change constitution, so you have to be careful about that.
Representative Brown, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Senator, Mr. Chairman, so as you say, you struggle with putting in a particular mill levy. We already have 4 for education that we don't apply to education statewide. So I guess, why don't we put those 4 in as the legislative body, see what we can fill up there? That's incumbent upon us, and then fill in the gap at a later date. Why do we not have that?
There's
Go
a
ahead.
place, and I will illustrate to you where it is, where you could do that if you chose to. I would advise against it, but you could. Okay. And I'll show you where as we get there.
Through the chair, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else? Okay, proceed, please.
Okay, item 2. Decision of the voters in an election authorizing capital expenditures, however financed, and again, notice that however financed, shall be final. And neither a school district nor the state may be required to fund any capital expenditures rejected by the voters. Now, notice a couple of things about that. We can't be required. That's instructions to the courts, frankly. But we could. Not being required is different from saying we can't do it. And we could judge if something was rejected, we could say, okay, there's a piece of this that is absolutely essential and we're going to see that it gets done. We could, with this language, we could handle that kind of circumstance. And again, notice the however financed, along with what I'd said previously about funding by other means. So you carry the principle forth. This is envisioning using the traditional bond issue system, but it's leaving the door open in case that doesn't work anymore. You know, we get a bad inflation. Bonds may be worthless and unsaleable. You might have to do something very different. Mr. Chairman, that's what that does. Any questions on this, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and this one, I understand it. It says, nor the state may be required to fund any capital expenditure. But then when you go on to page 3, line 14, the legislature may appropriate funds to relieve hardship. We're recognizing that we likely are going to have a hardship. And so it seems to me you're almost setting up a conflict in the Constitution.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I don't see a conflict. The provision here leaves the door open for the legislature starting to do something. They may relieve hardship is again a may. It's permissive. So both of these sections have a permissive ability, but basically we're saying that is the business of the legislature.
Vice Chair Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Senator, I guess I'm going to piggyback what the good majority floor leader just said here. And as I read Article 7, Section 1, the legislature shall provide for the establishment and maintenance of a complete and uniform system. So if you give this up to the individual school districts, you leave open this conflict of these individual school districts bonding for different amounts and maybe not providing for the same level of a school comparatively across the state. So I agree that this sets up a conflict within the Constitution.
Go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, basic principle of statutory or constitutional construction. The specific will trump the general. And this is much more specific and very specific. And that's one of the reasons it's very specific.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Isn't it also true that in constitutional construction that you read from beginning to end and something that would be in Section 1 would trump something lower and later in the section?
No.
Senator, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, no. This is a more specific provision and that will govern.
Okay. Yes, Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator, seeing as how we're going through step by step, I'm sorry, I should have brought this up when we did the first room, Annette, and where you acknowledged that we'd be overturning Campbell, which very specifically said that we would be responsible as a state for providing school facilities. But it seems to me as we go along, it's not simply about the provision of school facilities, it's also about the provisions regarding equity and the notion that a child in Sundance will have the same education and educational opportunities as a child in Laramie. Right. And so as we go through here, I'm attempting to see how we meet the equity provisions throughout each of your specific Romanettes, and I'm not getting there yet. So that's
There, Mr. Chairman, as we go through, I'll point out a specific point that is on point for the equity, and we'll discuss that. It's a little different vision of the equity, but it's there. So,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the third item here, cost of paying bonds and interest shall be equalized so that the needed district mill levy does not exceed what the mill levy would be if the district had the state average per person assessed valuation. Let's stop right there and think about what we're doing. What that does is says that we're going to bring your, if you're a district that is poor in terms of assessed valuation per person, you're going to have to pay not whatever it would cost to retire those bonds of your own hide. You're going to be equalized, so you're paying what you would be as if you had the average assessed valuation per person. So there's an important equity provision. It will bring in a district like Albany County, where the assessed valuation is a good deal lower than the average. This would be as if you had the average, and the gap will be made up by the state funding, the mandatory equalization. So that means that there will be a basic equity in the resources available right across the state. There is not a recapture provision here. I omitted one for two reasons. One, we already do recapture on the operating side. And so we do hit the very wealthy mineral districts with that recapture provision. So you have that amount of equalization. But this one is saying we're not going to do that here, and we could. You could work that out. You could, but I do not recommend it. It's mechanically hard to do. And second, there's a balance here. Being a boom town, whether it be Teton Jackson with the real estate boom they've got there, or Sweetwater County or Campbell County with what's happened, or Converse County currently. There are some special things that impinge on you. So I don't think we can, in fairness, recapture every time we deal with something. And so I thought this was a good one to omit that. And the second is the constitutional amendment. We got to get it passed. And you put in something that will cause 3 or 4 counties to vote against it in block. You make it much more difficult to pass the election. So we've already got a recapture in the one. I did not include it here and don't recommend it. Mr. Chairman, are there other questions?
Senator Harshman, I think we had a question over here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator. So obviously this equalization is problematic on who pays it and how it gets paid. And I think you try to
We'll address that in the next
Let me
section.
just kind of, if I can, keep going here a minute, Mr. Chairman. So if you would flip over to page 3, members, and it talks about really this appropriations, dedicated source of fund, and shall include if necessary. What is it? I mean, a statewide mill levy. And I think, and you just think about the morals of that deal. So I'm in Campbell County, or I'm in Crook County, and I'm in Crook County. I live where Representative Nyman lives, but us folks in Casper, we approve a school. And so now we got to get equalized. So now we're going to impose a tax on him to help pay for my school.
Go ahead.
How's
Senator.
that going to work?
Mr. Chairman, may I finish dealing with section 3 and then come back to this when we deal with the next
Sure.
section?
Okay. Okay, question on section 2.
Nope, section 3, because
okay.
this, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Senator, now I am confused because you gave this as an example of equity with this equalization portion. And before we get to the good Chairman of Revenue's question, to me, what this is saying is Laramie, Albany County, which has very low assessed valuation. The most that we could get in terms of school would be at the average level for assessed valuation. So that other school districts could bond for more facilities, right? They can get more. Laramie can only get up to whatever the average is.
Mr.
Laramie wants a little more.
Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think there's a misunderstanding. You can vote for whatever you think you need. And we'll get into some of the paying for it, but your mill levy will go up depending on how much you vote for. But it will go up as if you had the average assessed valuation, not what you've actually got. So if you have, say, half the average assessed valuation, you would pay as if you had the average assessed valuation, but you'd pay a quarter of the cost doing it that way. And the other quarter, the other 3/4 of that, I've got my math right, would come from the state. So it would be equalized to what you would pay. You'd pay what you would with the average assessed valuation. That goes up on how much you vote for. You know, if you're adding something to a elementary school, modest expansion, you pay very little. If you build a whole new high school, that's obviously much more expensive. You pay a lot more, but it's still what you would pay as if you have the average assessed valuation. It's not a ceiling on how much you can vote for.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't understand that there was a ceiling, but boy, now when we get into Chairman Harshman's issue, my county could pass the Taj Mahal school. And at our assessed valuation, we'd be paying pennies on what we'd be charging Gillette or Jackson. Right?
Okay.
Go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, the rest of that, first we say the applicable federal census information being used to determine the number of persons. This is for the equalization. It doesn't have to be the decennial census. We could, and sometimes we would, Mr. Chairman, where you have wild population fluctuations within the 10-year period. We could use different census information. That's why it's written the way it is. But it has to be federal census. And that would put a stop to arguments that we've got a different count on the population and all that sort of thing. So I think it's important to stick with the federal census information. It may not be perfect, but it's a reasonable standard for everybody. And then the final sentence, equalization may be provided for capital construction financed by other means. Notice the may be. That gives us latitude to be sensible. It does mean, for instance, if we found a circumstance where bonds were no longer viable, we could, by legislation, retain the spirit of this, provide a proper equalization formula, and deal with it. We'd have the constitutional ability. We could also suppose a school district wants to spend $30,000, $20,000 on a fancy shed to store athletic equipment or bicycles or what have you in it. And it's simply not worth the cost of going to a bond issue. They could go ahead and do it. It permits that kind of small, what might be defined as capital expenditure that does not rise to the level of something you'd want to take to a bond issue. This will allow for that too. So that language is important in those respects.
Representative Summers?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I have 2 recapture districts in my county. And when I read this, and my question to you will be, why did you not prohibit recapture? Because the way I read this, what will happen, because we are the few as opposed to the many, before you ever tax yourself, you'll take somebody else's money first. And then it'll be somebody in some other district voting to take my money away from my district. And so kind of tell me why you didn't go down the of preventing recapture in this.
Mr. Chairman.
With the chair, Senator.
Mr. Chairman,
Go
I
ahead.
think that we've got adequate provisions in terms of equality of taxation in the Constitution already to handle that. And I think putting that kind of recapture prohibition in might cause the other counties to vote against it. So I'm trying to avoid that kind of issue because we do have to pass this. Yeah, or whatever solution we come up with, we got to pass it. We got to pay attention to that sort of thing. Item 4, financing of the equalization may include appropriations. That's straightforward. We know how to do that. Dedicated sources of funds. We know how to do that. That's something well within our power. I think those 2 things cover the standard things that we do all the time and know how to do. And shall include, if necessary, a statewide mill levy set to assure payment of the equalization. 2 points on that. If you're going to sell bonds, you have to have a mechanism for generating the funds to repay them. Otherwise, the bond legal counsel will make sure that you never sell any bonds. I think that's just straightforward. That's the real world. So you have to have a guaranteed mechanism. This does mean that we'll have a statewide mill levy whenever we have equalization, if we don't fund it by some other means. And if times are good, I suspect we will. If times are bad and we can't find a way, then you have something that sets in automatically, work mechanically, just the way it works at the local level when you do a bond issue. The technical experts tell you each year what you've got to charge to pay that bond back, and it goes on the tax rolls. No great mystery, and not particular. It's a set of calculations we've been making since statehood at the local level. No great mystery how to do it, but you do have to have a mandatory way, and that's why this is written the way it is. Because otherwise, I think you simply cannot sell the bonds. There is an incentive here for us to use appropriations or some dedicated revenue source. Because who wants to, that's how people go home and say, we kept you from getting a further property tax. So there's an incentive for us to do that. But we may not always get it done, and you have to have a guaranteed method. If you wanted to put a dedicated mill levy in here, then maybe you could expand this to cover the major maintenance. You could expand it so that it would you'd have another source before you had to go to whatever the statewide mandatory thing was. This would be, if you wanted to do that, this would be the place to do it. But I would leave the guarantee in because you've got to have it to make the bonds work. And then a very important provision. I would say putting in a guaranteed mill levy will make it harder for us to sell this to the voters, but it won't make it impossible. It'll make it harder. Well, that's a matter of judgment for this committee. Compliance with the debt limit imposed by Article 16, Section 5 of the state constitution. That's the 10% of assessed valuation limit that's in the constitution in that article. Shall be determined using only the school district's share of payment for the debt. So that limitation still applies, but we apply it basically to just that which the locals have to pay. And that's determined at the time you do the bond issue, the way it has to be determined. So that limitation is still there, still valid. But before, it was preventing particularly our reservation districts and some of the districts like Albany County, 20%, quarter of the district, something like that, from potentially constructing things they had to have. And that was one of the reasons that the court did what it did, was because they had to get around that problem, because that is in the Constitution. That was how the Constitution put in the bond issue system in 1890 and tried to have some control on it. 1890, they did not have the vast disparity that you have now in wealth, because we didn't have our modern system of taxing the mineral wealth that has been very beneficial to all of us in this room. They just didn't have it. And so you had much more uniformity among the districts. And besides, a lot of your small districts, the men in the district would get together and build a log cabin for the schoolhouse. Literally, that was how they did a lot of the things. Different world in 1890. But that limitation is there, and I think we have to honor it. And this does that. Mr. Chairman, I would summarize this we've seen so far. The call is for skin in the game. This will make the decisions made on what to build at the local level by people whose taxes will go up if they vote yes. That was the decision. That was a system we had from statehood until Campbell 2. There's a hint we had to change in Campbell 1. Campbell 2 is the definitive one. That system worked. I can remember growing up in this state, seeing school bond issues in our county, which is close to the average statewide, or what and was at that point, past the time when we had the highest assessed valuation and got the 1 on our license plate. And school board asked for things they really needed. Typically more classroom space because Casper was growing. The bond issue would pass. The school board was perceived as gold plating the request. Down it would go. And they'd trim it back and come back. There was a negotiation between the school board, the school district, and the voters, with the voters having the final say. That system worked. That's where we're going back with the equalization and with dealing with that constitutional debt limit issue, which are critical. So that's the essence of this. Now, 2 other brief provisions, Mr. Chairman. Item 5. Means shall be provided to decide which facilities are not needed for education and are not subject to equalization. Let me give you a historical example. In Matrona County, in the 1920s, in the good years then, the county decided, I don't think any of the people that made that decision are alive still, but decided that we needed an auditorium in the community. And we built the auditorium in Trumbull County High School. And I can remember growing up as a child, going to all kinds of very public events, often educational, but public events in that auditorium. I go to the Wyoming Symphony Orchestra in that auditorium. It has been a very valuable facility for the community as a whole. It was paid for, the school bond system, entirely local. It does have use for the school. The school uses it. And it does a number of things there. It is useful. We'd have to, with this provision here, school community want to do something like that. They could, but a percentage of it would not be subject to equalization. And we'd have to deal with that mechanism statutorily. How do you decide that? It'll be a very real issue because it's going to happen and you got to allow for it. And you got to be fair. And that's the sort of thing that we can leave to statute. So this is the allowance for that statute. And then the final provision, the legislature may appropriate funds to relieve hardship. Let me give you a hypothetical example. Suppose the community has just indebted itself with the bond issue to build a nice school. And if school's in operation, a year later, a tornado comes through and just destroys it. That's going to create a real hardship on that community, potentially on the taxpayers in that community. They may well ask the state for assistance. You need something like this to deal with a circumstance like that. You can envision all kinds of hardships. I don't think it would happen very often, but I think having the constitutional ability to be fair and be sensible under these circumstances is worthwhile. Mr. Chairman, and then there's the standard ballot statement. What I would say to the committee in summary is I put this together seeking to get a solution that would work on the table. I think this will work. What I'm hoping is that having this on the table as a possibility will inspire others to look at it and say, is there a better way we can come up with? Because, Mr. Chairman, we don't have to pass this year. I think we need to get it on the ballot or something on the ballot, because I think it will have to be a constitutional amendment. Well, we need to get something on the ballot, some solution worked out by the end of the budget system, so we can go to the people and say, here is the best solution we can come up with. So I would use this, if you would, as a benchmark of opportunity. You could take this, you could work it, you could do something different with it. We could get very creative in the interim, come up with something better. But this has been around now since 2018. I haven't seen a better solution. I haven't been able to think of a better solution. So I am challenging all of you to think about it. You could improve this, you can pass it out, you can say we need to think about it till next year and see if we can find a better solution. But we have to do something, or we're just going to have the disaster where we really can't do capital construction and we lose control of the situation. And we have just a god-awful mess that the people would rightly perceive as a mess that we've failed to fix.
I believe Representative Summers was first and then Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Senator, first of all, we have to have these discussions, right? I mean, whether I like this bill or I don't like this bill, ultimately, we have to have the conversations with the state here on how do we find solutions to funding education.
Yes.
And so in that respect, I appreciate you bringing this. I still have one question before I have comments. And that is, this isn't standard boilerplate that you put in that you would put in a constitutional amendment to put in front of the people. So you go beyond the provisions in law, but then you go to what the person on the ballot sees, right? And you've been around a lot longer than me, but I have never seen this subjective of language ever thrown to the voter in any constitutional amendment that I've voted on in my entire lifetime. So, and if I'm wrong, you correct me,
It's,
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, frankly, I did not devote the attention to the ballot statement that I might have. I tried to get the language of the amendment right, and that was a struggle. If you can come up with a better ballot statement, have at it. We had the same discussion on the Senate side, Senator Ruffus in particular, and he didn't come up with a better solution. But, you know, I put down what I honestly felt and let it go at that and did it. This hasn't changed from the 2018 version. So if you can come up with a better ballot statement, so.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't say whether I could come up with a better ballot statement. What I ask you, have you ever seen this subjective of language in a constitutional amendment that was been put to the voter? That's the question I'm asking.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my memory isn't that good. I have seen some that were so bureaucratic, I didn't understand them. And I was basically, I was trying to speak to the voters what my belief was, but that's, take it or leave it, that it doesn't have legal significance. It does have significance in getting it passed. Improvements are welcome.
Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Scott, I mean, you talked at the beginning of this in your presentation about trying to find a solution to a problem. Do you know the size of the problem? Do you know how much, I mean, what is the budget right now? How much of it's major maintenance? How it's funded? How big a deficit do we have in schools? I mean, I can tell you all this stuff because I've been living it, right? But do you know that? I mean, you say we got this insurmountable problem and we need to change our constitution. And I would agree that a system enacted by the legislature to comply to the Wyoming Spurt no longer works because of the funding source, coal bid bonus. Sure, we didn't even fix a light bulb in this state for 25 years, right? We were busted and we've caught up a lot. I think that's part of the story that was, but what is the budget right now, this biennium? I mean, I know that.
I don't know it off the top of my head. I've got it,
Yeah,
I've looked at it, I've got it
Through
in
the
my
chair,
notes back
please.
that I didn't bring down.
Through the
But
chair,
So,
please.
Mr. Chairman, it's about 240 million a biennium. So let's just talk yearly numbers, about 120 million. So, you know, probably most of that actually is major maintenance, right? 75, a little bit over half. It's about 50-50, a little bit over half now is major maintenance. Okay, on the school Capcom budget. So then if you look at that yearly kind of number, 120-ish out of a 240 biennium total, it's 120 now, it's this biennial budget. We're paying for most of that. We've got about a $50 million shortfall per year. So we've got 70 million of this covered out of the 120. That's major maintenance, everything. And so you'll recall now, we used to have coal lease bonus. We don't, but we do have a little FMR stream, about $5.5 million. Okay, we changed the statute. Remember, somebody back in the 90s put an $8 million cap on the 1/3 of state royalties that our Constitution says go to sport. Now we're fully supporting. So that freed up about $25 million. And then just a couple of years ago, we dedicated half of the 0.45% of the SIPA, which is investment return on the permanent trust fund, you know, to do that. So that's my little math here that I scratched while you're talking about 73 million out of the 120 is solved. So just under 50 million. And that's what Don Richards, all their LSO has said. We got about 250 million in operations and we got 50 million a year on CapCon. And so I think I'm looking for a solution too. And in all fairness, I mean, and we're going to work on, but 50 million bucks, you and I could figure that out in about 30 seconds. You know, we could, instead of going to ask people with high assessed valuation to pay for people, low assessed valuation. And the system, I'll just say, I think we're closer to 2070 than we are 1970. We are. And the system we had didn't work. I remember going to Hewlett's gym. I remember going to Sundance's gym. It wasn't the same as it is now. Upton's gym, all those schools. And because we were dirt poor. And now we've equalized this a little bit where every kid in Wyoming's got a decent chance. And boy, I just think this takes us backwards. And I think we don't have that big a problem. We really don't, Senator. 50 million bucks. And so, Mr. Chairman, and I know that's my comment. I don't have a question, but I gotta actually go to school facilities so they have a quorum. Next door, they're meeting, try to figure out some topics. But I appreciate you bringing it. This baby needs a lot more work. This whole idea, I think there's better solutions, but I appreciate you bringing it. I like the way you're always thinking, but thank you, Mr.
Senator, do you like to respond quickly?
Yes.
Want to respond to that.
Mr. Chairman, and I will pass out to the committees when as we're done here, an analysis of the history on this. The history is an average of, including major maintenance, of 300 million a biennium. And I think that long-term, unless you think Wyoming is going to be just totally a ghost state because of the attacks on our fossil fuel industry. And I'm more optimistic than that, Mr. Chairman. We've got a problem that fortunately we're at a low point in the need right now. So we have some time to work out some solutions and we need it because we do not have the funding source. Let's be just.
And Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know, and I know, and most of that number is skewed because of what happened in Natrona County. I mean, we built almost 400 million in schools in Natrona County in a short boom because we had this massive coal bid bonus payments.
Yeah.
And we had two of the largest schools in the state rebuilt that have the most kids of anywhere. And that's the big skew. So there's a lot to this story.
Yeah.
But I think things have calmed down and we look at our projections in school facilities for the next 50 years. We know we got to recapitalize part of this asset every year to keep this thing going because we don't want to go back to the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
We didn't do anything.
Mr. Chairman, the Supreme Court pried the lid off the pork barrel. And us pigs went in and got our share of the pork and that it's all over the state, but we're as guilty in Natrona County as anybody and maybe even more so. They really created a pork barrel system because all of us defend our home district. And none of us know enough to say no to somebody else's district.
Follow up, Representative
Mr.
Harshman.
Chairman, and I think that's why you have the School Facilities Commission and a department to go out and look at all this. Because, I mean, I know you didn't go to our public school, at least high school. You didn't go to Natrona County, did you?
No.
Like my office, I sat under there and about 10 feet away, hundreds of pigeons crapped just above the air intake. Then it came in and blew right over the top of me. Now, nobody else in the state knows about that, but when school facilities looked at it, tested it, they never did tell me the results, right? But I mean, that's why you have professionals go around and look at all these schools. And we've got a beautiful system now that we've created for this next century. And boy, I'm going to protect that. I don't think, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's about pigs at the trough. I think it's about looking at the needs assessment. That's what it is. And we took care of the worst first. And now our next challenge is overcrowding because hopefully we're going to keep growing. And I think you're going to see it in this town. There's still 700 kids in portables. How are we going to fix that?
Senator,
So
you have a
we
reply?
got work to do.
I would say he was living evidence that he's survived the pigeons.
I think Representative Harshman, Nyman had a comment.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to hold you. You go ahead. No, it's just a comment.
Go ahead.
No, you go, Representative. That's fine. Just to relay something to you, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As I sat on the school board, we went through this and I was going through our school when they were destroying it. And Lee Mosier from Ainsworth Benning was walking with me down the halls of that facility. And he said, "This is tragic." And I said, "What do you mean, Lee?" He said, "I am tearing down a better school than what I'm building for you right now." And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I mean, your state has more money than common sense. And this was from a general contractor that built schools. He said, I've got facilities, schools in South Dakota that would give their right arm to have the building I'm destroying taken to their facility. He said, they're educating kids in those buildings and they're doing well. But he said, this is unbelievable. He said, your building I'm going to build you is not going to be as efficient. He said, it's not going to be as strong. The gymnasium is not going to be what he thought is good. We fought to save half of that school, and we still use that gymnasium to this day. And so the question in my mind was, and I mean, I'm not trying to create a fight or create hard feelings here, but that's the reality of it. That building was built on bond dollars, and they built it really well. And they built what they needed, and they spent the money wisely and efficiently so that because they knew how hard those dollars were to come. I can appreciate what you're saying in the fact that when you have skin in the game, you're much more confident and much more aware of how you're spending those dollars. And when you spend money in a third-party system, many times you spend money that you didn't personally earn on something you're not personally going to use, there's always room for inefficiencies. And that's why I think it's vital that we consider this, guys. Now, let's just be honest, consider this, that we would give communities the opportunity to be able to say, yes, we want to be able to partake in this, and we're going to have a vested interest in what and how these dollars are spent. Because I know personally, I spend money differently when it's my money than I do when I try not to, but when it's not been earned by me, nor is it going to be something I'm not going to be using once it's built. So I know firsthand what you're saying, because I walked with the general contractor through that building. And he said, this is a travesty, unnecessary. So I understand what he's saying. And that facility, part of it is still staying there. And I served on that board to save that. It's called the Greater Hewlett Community Center now. Beautiful facility, old facility, and has now become the city hall and the main recreation center for the community. And so those old buildings were valuable. And what they told us was unnecessary to rebuild, and those dollars could have been better spent elsewhere with more money being focused on what was more necessary.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
all I can say to that is amen.
Okay, any other comments from the committee before we call for public testimony? Okay, open up for public testimony.
Mr. Chairman, if I may pass out to the committee an analysis. on this.
Sure, that'd be fine. Yes, Marguerite.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is Marguerite Herman, and I'm here as, on my own behalf, as a trustee from Laramie County School District 1, but also a 40-year observer of the school finance system. And if I could just comment real briefly on the situation Representative Nyman said. Well, first of all, let me say, I never thought I'd be here, but I was singing the praises of the school facilities department and commission, because in those first few years, they got a lot of stuff wrong, including having this it was somewhat artificial square footage requirement. And so they told district, we'll build a new school, but you also have to give up. And, and they measured hallways and counted it against this classroom size. I mean, they made a lot of mistakes, and they did force districts to tear down and get rid of facilities. I know that happened. They're a lot better now, I would have to say. And the Laramie one has gone through them. I've seen in my tenure already three schools built, and they have a thing called the most cost-effective remedy study. And so you have to go through and you have to show capacity problems and the need. And most of our needs right now are capacity, though we have, I think, half the schools on the top or bottom 20 list of schools are in our county. So we are the poster child for the one who's been put off. And I know a lot of people blame Natrona County for sucking all the air out of the room for a while, but it doesn't matter. We made a case, we have a case for our needs. And what we have to do, and what this constitutional amendment would work around, is having to make a case to someone who supposedly got the credentials and a statewide view on facility needs, to judge if your plans are efficient and it's the most cost-effective remedy, and they come in and value engineer, sometimes to excess. South High School, they valued engineered the heck out of that thing. And so the CTE space is way undersized, and one of our next big projects is going to have to be to enlarge those. The culinary kids can't even turn around in the room. So sometimes they go to excess, but and sometimes there's been some political influence. I mean, I admit it hasn't been perfect, but at least you have to make a case. And in some, well, I will have to say some years it's better than others. But anyway, but I'm arguing for that versus a district making a choice about where and how. And the amendment, constitutional amendment kind of indicates that it's going to have some oversight, but it doesn't say what or how or who's going to do it. And I think that statewide view, I think, is important, and it gives you someone who's not favoring one part of town or one set of students or that sort of thing. Or maybe saying, well, gee, we'd like to promote growth to the east, so let's build a school in the east and they will come. And I mean, you can just see that local decisions might have other than the best use of state funds might. And let me see. Oh, I will say there, the one thing I do like about it is the idea of the statewide mill levy as a way to raise money for construction. That would be, but that's down the road. That's in another thing. And also, I guess I remember in all the iterations that I saw, especially in the 90s, talked about bringing a mill, they used to call it power equalizing. So you get a mill levy and power and equalize it to the statewide average. And then there was considering that's, and I know there's a mean median mode going on, but basically half the people in the state are going to be above that and have access to funds that the other half doesn't. And so there's inequities in that. So I think by that very definition, I think you're already kind of violating that principle. And I guess, let me see. Anyway, I just would say that I think this goes in the wrong direction. The state legislature really kind of explored this whole idea of local bond issues. And I'll tell you, and actually, I asked before the current situation, you know how many bond issues were passed in Laramie 1? I think it was like, one every 10 years. So asking one part of town, because we're big enough to have, I mean, we have like 26, 27 elementary schools, et cetera, asking a whole district, people on one side of town to support building in another side of town. There were rivalries. It wasn't, a lot of schools that should have been built didn't get built, and the state had to step in. And I think using a really good professional school facilities department, school facilities commission does a pretty good job, not always, and they haven't always got it right, but I think that is the method to get where we need to go. And we do need to find another revenue source. I completely agree with that. So anyway, so I don't know how much I'm informed. I just, I never thought I'd be here singing the praises of the school facilities department because we go hand-to-hand combat with them sometimes, but I do appreciate the job they do to vet these things and make sure they're built in the right part of town and they're built well. And we have a prototype and we use it over and over again for an elementary school because that's effective and cost. And anyway, I'll stand for questions, but I know other people want to say things, so I want to just leave it there if possible.
Questions? Yes, Representative Harsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Marguerite, Ms. Herman. So in the end, though, when these plans are all adopted, you as a school board, you have to, they're your buildings. You have to approve what's torn down or what's built or in the end, through these guidelines of allowable square footage, you're going to sign off on it on the end. It's not the state coming in and saying, you have to build this or you have to do this.
Mr. Chairman, we definitely do, and we have a very professional planning and construction department where we decide to get rid of some of those, all those modulars, and where we need to build a school, what is needed, and transportation needs to get there. It's a very complicated formula, and that we have to make a really good, solid plan. Yeah, we do have to make a lot of judgments locally, and then submit it to the state. And then there's a lot of back and forth, and usually we'll already have the land purchased, but sometimes not. Maybe that's part of the deal. But there is some give and take, and obviously it's not all top down. And before our planning construction department puts together a plan, we do a lot of consulting with people in the district. And we do studies of where's the growth going. And so, if we have a bunch of growth going out north, we will do that. And you don't play favorites, no fear, no favor. That's the best way to do this. And you put it into local politics. And I'm just not sure it will serve districts the best, statewide the best, especially if you have a statewide mill levy. I think districts, other places need to know their mill is going to the right place, and it's not just to some locally favorite plan. I think that's the best, but it has to be done well, and it has not always been done well. I will grant you. I remember that when they talked about preservation of, anyway, I won't go back. Ever you all remember.
There are questions from the committee? Committee, I'm looking out here and I know that there are people out here, and I'm assuming there are probably people on the virtually that would like to testify. And I just don't think that we have time to give this bill a fair hearing with kind of testimony that we'd like to see from the public. So, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes left before we have to be back in session again. So what's the pleasure of the committee? How do you want to proceed? Do you want to stay here and listen to other testimony for the next 20, 30 minutes or half an hour, or do you want to?
Motion to table.
Okay, it's been moved that we table the bill. Is there a second to that? Seconded by Conley. I guess discussion on the tabling. Is there, I guess that's discussable, isn't it? I don't remember. We should know that. Not,
No, it's not, actually.
it's not debatable. Yeah, that's right. It's privileged. I should know that as an old ag teacher, but I guess we don't use Robert's Rules of Order though, do we? All right, all in favor of tabling the bill signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Okay, the motion is carried. The bill is tabled. And we have some business to take care of that we're going to be meeting jointly with our Senate colleagues on Friday to decide on our future on the interim, what we're going to do and where we're going to meet and when we're going to meet. So if you have any suggestion between now and then, it would be good to give them to me or make sure that you have your voice heard when we meet on Friday. That's at 8 a.m. and it's in room W6. So any final comments before I adjourn the meeting? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Senator, for your presentation.